Hello. Welcome back to Marshmallow Reads. I'm Marcy, and today I'm going to be telling you about the books I'm never going to read. So technically this is going to be like an anti-TBR sort of deal. This is going to include just general authors I will never read again, and then specific books that I just won't read. I'm going to start with some not so fun ones. So the first author that I'm just never ever going to read again is J.K. Rowling. If you haven't heard by now, yeah, she's a shitbird turf. I don't want I don't want anything to do with her. So a bit of a background on my personal experience with Harry Potter. I did grow up reading the books. I watched all the original series movies, but after that last movie came out, I was kind of done with the series. Like, I liked it, and I know that I am a Hufflepuff, I guess, but I never really got obsessed with it like many of my peers did. Like, I don't know what it was, it just never clicked in the same way for me that I saw it click for others. And if you still love this series, if you have that deep connection to it, I feel for you. Like, this is some nonsense that you shouldn't have to deal with, but here we are. And because I don't have a very deep connection to the series to begin with, it was very easy for me to just completely let go of it and everything else that would come in the future, because I do not ever want to give this woman any bit of money, not a single cent. So I won't be reading The Cursed Child. I heard that one was bad anyway. I didn't watch any of the Fantastic Beasts movies. I will not be reading any future Harry Potter books. Yeah, I want her out of my life forever. So goodbye. Next up is a general author, but I'm gonna talk, I guess, specifically about one specific book. So this book I originally had on my TBR, but eventually took off, and that is Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card. So I remember reading Ender's Game in high school and generally liking it, and I had heard on forums and stuff that Speaker for the Dead, its sequel in this series, was even better. And I was like, ooh, yeah, I love sci-fi. It is my favorite genre, and I was excited to read this. I remember looking out for it in my library book sales and stuff like that, because I knew it was going to pop up eventually. But then I heard about some of the author's horrible opinions, really. I'm not going to put it lightly. He's straight up homophobic, in a way. I mean, any homophobia is disgusting, but he was loud about it. He was in 2008, he was very much against the legalization of same-sex marriage. He didn't understand why people would want it to be legalized in the first place. What? And he also, at least, at some time, but probably still, supports the writing and passing of certain laws that would ban homosexual actions, behaviors. I'm not entirely sure what he means, but I can imagine. And it's some tyrannical bullshit that I will not support in any way. Not in this house, not now, not ever. So it's a bit of a loss for me not getting to read Speaker for the Dead, but there are so many other good sci-fi books out there. I'm not really seeing it as a loss. Okay, so the following authors and books that I mention next are not ones that I have a moral issue with. It's just mostly cringy stuff that I don't want to mess with. So next is Anymurakami. I'm kind of done with him. So I have given 3 of his books a chance. I gave him a pretty solid chance, and no thank you. Okay, so I have read After Dark, Hard Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, and 1Q84. That last one is what tipped me over the edge. So I generally like his stories. Like they're interesting, they're imaginative. I know he has a thing about being against being labeled as any sort of genre fiction. I would say that he definitely fits into the sci-fi fantasy genre, but he would be mad about that labeling. He just wants like literary or general fiction, but tropes are tropes, dude. You're gonna end up in there anyway, but whatever. I do generally like the stories. They are interesting, but the characters, specifically the female characters, just fuck with me. Like, oh god, he's notoriously bad at writing sex or being just creepy. I found when I was googling this to find examples, I found that he was nominated for a Bad Sex Award for 1Q84, like in 2011, and then very, very recently, like this year, I don't remember the book it was on, but he got another nomination or maybe even award for bad sex for his writing in his most recent release. Like, this dude, I don't know if he is legitimately trying and failing this hard, or if he doesn't care, or he's just straight up, I don't know, misogynistic? I don't know. Like, it's hard to tell. Like, I don't want to read any of these quotes out loud because it's gross and bad, but it's just like weird ways of writing women. Like, a woman would never want to be described in this manner, and in 1Q84 specifically, the thing that threw me over the edge was he was writing these sorts of things about an underage girl sexually, sexual things. And there was like a hand wavy thing he did, was like, oh, she's not technically a real girl, so it doesn't count. Yes, it does. It's still really creepy, and yeah, I'm done. I don't want to run into that anymore, so no thank you, goodbye. Slightly less cringy, I have Game of Thrones, just the entire series by George R.R. Martin. Whew. Okay, so when I was in college, these books were so hyped up. Like, everyone, it seems like, was reading them. Even like traditionally non-readers were picking these books up, which I found interesting because these are chunky. They were quite intimidating. I owned, I think, the first two. Never actually got around to reading them, but I did watch all of the series. And when I was in college, this was when the series was still good. I think up until season 5 or 6. And then after college is when it started to go downhill. I know one of the things is it's been like 11 years or so since the last book in this series was published, and a bunch of the hardcore fans are seriously worried that the next book, or even the rest of the series, is never gonna be completed. Because, George R.R. Martin is not a spring chicken. Yeah, and even besides his age, he kind of has written himself into a corner, because his books are very filled with details, like plot details, so many different characters, a massive landscape. So it's a lot of threads to try to pull together in these final books. So I can imagine that would be hard to do, and especially after the horrific ending to the series, the HBO series. Like, oh my god, it's been like 1 or 2 years and it's still embarrassingly bad and just completely tanked this entire fandom. There used to be Game of Thrones themed wine, all of the clothes, merch, board games, video games, like, it was everywhere. And then after the final season aired, silence. It was really that bad. So I'm not surprised that these books are in the current state that they are. Like, I do not envy George R. R. Martin's job of trying to fix whatever garbage he's gotten into. Yeah, it's just too much. Too much heartache, too much uncertainty. So I'm just gonna skip it. Another series, the Acotar, or A Court of Thorn and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas. Nothing against the author. I just don't care for fairies, even if they're hot and sexy. Like, I've read a couple other booktubers like give their thoughts and like reactions to this series, and that alone is enough for me to enjoy. I don't feel the need to ever pick any of these books up. They're amusing through someone else having to read them. Next is a bit of a surprise, maybe. Dune by Frank Herbert. So I owned Dune. I owned a copy of Dune for probably about a decade or more, and I never read it. I never even attempted to read it. And when I had to move all my books out from my childhood room, I ended up donating it because I just knew I was never going to reach for it. And I don't know what it is. I've heard that it's a pretty good story. I don't know. It seems like the type of detailed filled book similar to Game of Thrones that I'm just not interested in at the moment, and I haven't been for a very long time, so I can only assume I won't be for a similarly long time. So I'm just gonna wait for, I think October is when the Denis Villeneuve version of Dune is coming out. I am very excited for that. He is my favorite director, so I have faith that this will be a good adaptation. And even if it's not, I don't ever really want to have to think about the original. That's just a personal opinion. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I don't wanna. So this is an author that I don't actually have any beef with. I'm good. And that is Chuck Palahniuk. I read Haunted in 2016, and it still haunts me. I did not even want to look up like a synopsis to refresh my memory on this one. Honestly, I don't really need to, and I didn't want to. So from what I remember, this is a writer's group, the writer's workshop that is held in like this house or this building, and it's a lock-in. So they all sign up and agree to stay in this building for a month, 2 months, some amount of time, and they can't leave. They agreed to this initially. They understood what they were getting into. They had all of the food provided for them. It was like, I don't know, like a pantry full of food. They had beds, bathrooms, you know, a normal thing things you would need to live comfortably. And the idea was, you know, to get over your writer's block, to just get whatever you're working on done, and this is a safe space to do it in. But very soon into this lock-in, stuff goes very wrong. Someone or some people in the group start sabotaging the building, start sabotaging the food, the plumbing, the lights, and just making life a gross, disgusting hell. Because you can imagine with, you know, a dozen or however many people living in a single building, a single space without any plumbing, the food and drink you ingest eventually have to come out. That's all I will say. It was so disgusting, so gross. Like, yes, he is very talented and can write well, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to read what he has to write because I am disgusted. My stomach churned while reading this, and maybe that's what you're after. If so, here's a recommendation. But for me, I am done. I had that experience. I do not want to relive it. No thank you. Like, I'll probably rewatch the Fight Club movie, but that's as far as I'll go into his universe. Okay, this one's not gross at all. And that's The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. So this is another book that I had on my TBR, like my Goodreads TBR, for years, and I was legitimately interested in this because I used to be obsessed with circus themed things. I still kind of am interested in that style, but I think this stemmed from my love of Panic at the Disco, like first album, early days, them. Very good stuff. But as I grew older, I kind of shifted away from that. And I also heard that this book is kind of a love it or hate it sort of deal. And I wasn't sure how I was going to react to it. So I didn't want to get disappointed. And I didn't want to waste my time on something that I wasn't really sure about. But I don't know. I'm like very much on the fence, and I don't want to mess with it. So I'm gonna label it in my anti-TBR. This is another book that I just don't want to deal with because I don't want to be disappointed. And it is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. I loved the original Hunger Games trilogy. Well, the third book, not so much, but the first two, fantastic. Great reading, super fun, just lovely, lovely, lovely stuff. And yes, it did kick off the dystopian YA era. And you know what? Good for it. It did such a good job in that genre. But when I heard that she was coming out with another story that is kind of like a prequel, but not necessarily, because I think it takes place like halfway between the start of the very first Hunger Games and then the Hunger Games trilogy. So it's like somewhere in the middle, and it follows Snow. I forget what it's called. Is he a governor? I don't know. I don't really care anymore. But it follows him, and he was one of the coaches in his Hunger Games year, and he, I guess, starts off as a good guy wanting to do good things, but then turns evil for reasons. And it just seemed like a story that didn't need to be told. It felt like less like a story that Suzanne Collins really, really wanted to revisit, and she wanted to give it a chance in the world. It felt more like a money grab, to be honest. Like, of all these stories of the Hunger Games universe that you could have told, you went with this? Like, sympathizing this evil ass dude? Why not like do an origin story, or like the origin of the Hunger Games itself event story? But yeah, I also heard it wasn't very good, so I'm not gonna waste my time on it. Goodbye. Okay, last I have the cringiest book on this list, and it's two of them. It is Ready Player One and Ready Player Two by Ernest Cline. I have watched so many videos on these books and the movie. I feel like I know the story, even not having ever read it. And that's okay. Like, I don't have to read it to know that I will hate it, because it's one of those books that doesn't really have its own backbone of a plot. The characters are puppets, and it's just jam-packed with references specifically to 80s media, and it's just such nostalgia bait, the kind that I despise. Like, there is no purpose for this story besides like, hey, remember this thing? Oh, and remember this other thing? What if you saw them on screen at the same time? Oh my god. Like, it just seems like bad fan fiction. Like, a 12-year-old wrote this bad fan fiction, and it just makes me mad. Like, it just, and what infuriates me the most is that it works. These are like bestsellers. The movie made so much money, and I hate that it did. Like, it's so lazy, and there's just like no effort put into it. Yeah, it's like, themes? What are those? Like, just base level acceptable writing. Like, not even. Yeah, I'm sorry if you like these books. I hate them, and I will never read them, and I hope they stop making them. But that's just my opinion, and you can disagree. Yeah, I mean, you know, this whole list, this whole video was just my opinion. It's okay if you have different views on the books that I mentioned. Maybe I didn't mention books that would be on your anti-TBR list. If you feel so inclined, go ahead and put those in the comments. What would you add on your anti-TBR list? What do you think should not have been on my anti-TBR list? If you enjoyed this video, I hope you give it a thumbs up. And if you really enjoyed this video, then I hope you consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean so much to me. That is it for me. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Do something nice for yourself. I'll see you in the next one.